Hi everyone, this is Kerem Baran with Solar Academy. Today I have with me Jon Bonanno. Jon, can you please tell us a little bit about this content we're going to talk about?
Kerem, hey, how you doing? This content was created in the Open Office program, and what we're about to watch is all about capital fuel sources for clean economy entrepreneurs to ensure that their balance sheet is strong enough to achieve the things they need to do when they need to do them. So it reviews all different types of non-dilutive capital, not just private equity, winning grants, winning awards, NREs, JDAs, etc. So it's a very, very good fundamental piece of material that every CEO should take a look at.
Great, thank you very much. Can you also tell us a little bit about what you do day to day?
I advise CEOs right now. My organization is called Strategic Operating Partners, and I'm the managing partner. We serve CEOs around the globe trying to solve the climate crisis.
Great, thank you very much.
Survive or thrive these very, very difficult moments. And the point of today's session is really that it's not all about venture capital or you're going to perish. There are many different options. Unfortunately, we weren't able to have Ian Rogoff join us this morning, but he is a contributor, as you'll find in a moment. So very quickly, as a reminder, New Energy Nexus is a 15-year-old non-for-profit. We've mobilized over about $1.5 billion on behalf of clean economy entrepreneurs. And we really do four things: launch, fund, accelerate, and scale clean economy businesses. Our vision is to support diverse entrepreneurs from all over the place, from people of color and women. It's the diversity we believe that will allow us to be sticky as a solution set for the society we wish to serve. And our goal is 100% clean economy for 100% of the people. These open office sessions are now open to anyone that would like to sign up. These are bespoke, custom one-on-one coaching sessions that the New Energy Nexus open office program offers. And we cover a variety of subjects, as I think Jonathan attested in certain moments here during our conversation. It may be about capital fuel today, and it may be about strategic conversation, go-to-market, business development stuff, or human capital issues. Today, we're joined by Jonathan Tan, as I said, and Jonathan has many years in industry, specifically in the thin film side of the business. He's a Berkeley grad. The other contributor here who was not able to join us is Ian Rogoff, who is the chairman of the New Energy Nexus, but he's also a prolific angel investor and formerly ran global partnerships for Microsoft. Obviously, you see on the right-hand side, he's a very well-scholared man as well. He's got his engineering degree from Georgia Tech, and then business degrees from Dartmouth and Stanford. So I wanted to start by discussing with Jonathan, or just introduce Jonathan, to say, good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. Thanks for having me today.
You're absolutely welcome, and thanks for the multitude of times we tried to do this, but Jonathan and I have a monthly call, which is part of our open office engagement, and he's been wise to engage in that conversation. So let's kick it off, Jonathan. Why don't you go ahead with your first conversation or question?
Yeah, thanks. So at CoreShell, we're an advanced battery materials company. We're trying to improve the transition to electric vehicles and clean energy storage with our thin film nanolayer technology. And our goal really is to create a fast growing and high impact business, which really means that we need to show non-linear returns for our investors. We need to grow quickly. For companies like ours, especially in the B2B sector, what are the best sources of cash that we should be looking for to run our business? And especially, in this landscape where VC money is not always going to be available.
That's right. I also want to say here, Jonathan, that you've done a fantastic job at burrowing into a lot of these suggestions that we're going to discuss. But you're also, CoreShell is in the process of doing a private equity capital raise right now. So we'd be remiss not to put out the flag for CoreShell Technologies to be considered by capital sources as a potential investment, because I think you yourself would argue that there's a potential to increase battery quality and value to the manufacturer and ultimately to the consumer of the products by significant deltas. And maybe just quickly, before we jump in on this first question, why don't you talk about the potential metrics of improvement that CoreShell technologies could deliver to the manufacturing customer and ultimately to the user of the energy storage product?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great prompt, and thanks for bringing that up. We are in the midst of closing a fundraising round. We're fortunate to be able to do so, and we feel like this is a great opportunity for us to improve our technology for batteries as a whole. Our goal is to solve the key degradation issue that happens in all rechargeable batteries when you cycle them. We have a nano-layer coating that prevents this degradation issue. And our goal is to create batteries that are 50% more effective on a cost per kilowatt hour basis, has twice the lifespan of a normal lithium ion battery, and improve safety. And we think those metrics can really bring about things like affordable electric vehicles, creating a electric vehicle with the quality and range of a Tesla, but at the cost competitiveness of a Toyota Corolla. And that would really allow for the average consumer to afford an electric vehicle, as well as create a profit for automotive OEMs, something they have not been able to do with electric vehicles. And then on the other side, in renewable energy industry, what we've seen is that the battery has now started to become one of the major sticking points in the widespread adoption of a lot more renewables. You need to pair solar and wind with an energy storage in order to have 24/7 access to clean energy. And so we need to make much cheaper batteries. And so by decreasing the cost per kilowatt hour of these batteries, we can enable solar plus storage to be cost competitive with fossil fuels in about 95% of use cases. We can reduce it by 50%. So that's our main goal.
Yeah, what you're discussing is like real quantum change in the current landscape. If, as CoreShell goes out into the world and succeeds with its energy storage manufacturing partners, we'll discuss your go-to-market in a little bit, but what you're describing is something that is really transformational to the clean economy, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So
Absolutely.
Let's go forward here. And when you look at the landscape of capital fuel, let's call it, or financial fuel for a CEO's balance sheet, we have a lot of different options. And I think that in sometimes when markets are very buoyant, most folks are saying, well, I have to get venture capital financing. That's how I win this game. And frankly, it is an option, but it is one of several options. And I think that both you and I can agree that the very best type of fuel for your business is a direct revenue situation where you're selling directly to your key customer and they're fantastically delighted with the outcome. That's obviously, and it's also profitable to do so for you. That's probably the best option. The next one, of course, is partner revenue, where you're selling to possibly a customer, but they really are not the ultimate customer. And so there's some royalty payment to you, or there's some sort of indirect revenue, but certainly having everyone being pleased with the outcome is the next best option. The next is awards, grants, prizes. You've been very successful at CoreShell and very diligent, I have to say. This isn't just happen chance. You said that you've been fortunate. I think that fortune goes to the ones that work hard. You certainly have to have a good idea, but being tenacious, keeping at it when people continue to say no, redesigning your plan, that's all extremely important, and you've been very good at that. And I hope that these open office sessions help in making those decisions. And you've been a grant winner of ours, so we have funded CoreShell Technologies. We're very proud of that. And we continue to support. So the next is non-recurring engineering contracts. We're going to talk about them in some depth here, and then joint development agreements. We're going to pair those together in a moment. And then non-recourse debt for your corporation. This is something that usually is associated with a top-tier private equity provider, and not usually available to someone that has not taken private equity financing. So just understand the limitations of that. And then there's, of course, private equity itself. Now, in these days, we have forgivable loans through the CARES PPP program. We have some really interesting government financing tools in these dire moments of COVID crisis, but we didn't list them here They should be. We have a whole segment on CARES Act PPP, the Paycheck Protection Plan. One should go to the open office link to reference those options. So today we're really going to focus in on the non-recurring engineering contracts and the joint development agreements. And how we kick this conversation off is Jonathan and I were discussing CoreShell's business, and we kept on ending up in a place that was about relatively restrictive joint development agreements, or some things that were not making either of us feel particularly comfortable. So I thought that us dissecting the options for getting capital on the balance sheet of CoreShell would be of interest, and I hope it is. So we're going to jump right in. Jonathan, why don't you kick off this next question?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we've been discussing CoreShell's long-term business development plans for a while now. So we're an early stage battery materials company. We're trying to get our product, as you mentioned, into the hands of battery manufacturers that can really promote clean energy storage. So we have several potential direct and indirect customers in our pipeline, generally large corporate companies, but they're long-term developments. They're not going to purchase a product from us in the near term. And most are not even really ready to establish full partnerships, full pilot projects, or to write a purchase order. So one of the questions that we've been discussing, in your recommendation, what is the best first step to maximizing those early relationships and creating value for my stakeholders, even at this early stage?
Yeah, and stakeholders, just for some clarification, are the stakeholders not only of CoreShell, but of the counterparty too, because this is a transaction that'll involve, in this case, or in several cases at CoreShell, there's several multi-billion-dollar global energy storage potential customers. And so it was a very sticky wicket when we first started talking about it. How do I navigate it? What are the things to consider? And I said, and certainly Ian very much agreed with this, and he was a little more direct with this advice, which is don't be lazy, know your customer. And I wish he was on here today, but he relayed some stories during his Microsoft days where knowing the customer was so critical to having a successful engagement. And we're going to dissect that a bit more, but there's nothing more valuable in any traction situation to know your customer intimately and to know the customer of your customer intimately. So we'll get into that further, but for all CEOs out there, you must be very deeply involved in either your chief commercial officer's business around who is your customer and what's important to them. And we're going to dissect that a little bit here. But the first rule is know your customer. So non-recurring engineering contracts. So the objective of these is really for quite a bit of get on the entrepreneur side and just a little bit of give. And you want to be able to advance the development of your platform and establish a relationship with your potential customer counterparty and test your market fit. Obviously, avoiding bankruptcy is a good thing. It's non-dilutive because you're not negotiating an equity position or warrants or any type of derivative of equity in your company to do an NRE is what they're called. And it puts yourself in a position for nonlinear return in the future, which of course is your business. So jumping through this, you were doing this unbeknownst to the nomenclature when we first started talking. And I thought, this is very clever. Tell me a little bit about your journey to arrive at doing NREs without really understanding what you were doing.
Yeah, no, that's a good good prompt. We were talking to a lot of these major corporates as we discussed. They're like you mentioned, multi-billion-dollar corporates. They're huge infrastructures. There's quite a size mismatch there, and I think that'll be the case for a lot of early stage startups. We're just small teams trying to get our hands around these large corporate entities. And I came to the same realization I think that we talked about earlier, where if we rush into something like a joint development agreement or we go down that path, there's a lot of danger in that. You can be giving away too much at an early stage. And in addition to that, it just takes a really long time to set those up. A lot of lawyering fees, a lot of IP negotiations. things that we weren't really comfortable with. So I took a step back and I said, hey, what's the smallest chunk that we could bite off? You know, let's not go for the whole pie all at once. Let's not try to get into this really formal partnership. Let's set up these small projects where, as you mentioned, we could really test out our product, show them that we can create this meaningful change for their business, for their commercial batteries or battery materials. And let's do it in a way that they have some skin in the game so that they can say, hey, you know, we're really excited about this. We're going to put our money down, but in a small amount, so that we can both kind of step forward in this relationship, do a testing agreement, and that'll set us up better for the next round of potential joint development or long-term development agreements.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it's really clever, and you've said some important things there that are worth teasing out. An NRE is not particularly expensive to execute, whereas a joint development agreement, as you'll find, is quite expensive from a legal perspective and a time perspective. Both of those things are terrible for a startup. The more time you spend trying to negotiate a single deal, the less time you have to grow other flowers in your garden. So, you know, as you've said, it's a low approval process typically at a big corporate. They don't require legal to get involved, corporate to get involved, their intellectual property people, because you're not exchanging any intellectual property. You're simply doing a simple test in isolation on your side, and then you're going to return results to them, which you all can discuss together. These obviously are low ticket items, usually below 100K per engagement, but they can be layered together. And that, I think, is a really prudent way to go about this, is start off with a 25K, show some simple results, entice your customer or your potential customer, and then you can potentially jump into 100K or 50K or 75K, and you layer them up. And I think you did that. Remind me, that's right, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. We started off at the smaller end, basically, you know, a small amount, and the amount really doesn't matter as much as really just getting them to sign a paid agreement. I would say
Yes.
that was kind of what we realized, is that it's not like you're trying to make a ton of revenue or profit off of these. It's really just having them sign on the dotted line and give you money is a significant first step. So that's what we did, try to create a small agreement, and then we were successful. So executing those projects, you want to be successful, obviously, and that led to some agreements for some bigger contracts.
But this was also not only important for your commercialization pathway, but it was also very important for your conversations with other potential funders, like government agencies or certainly private equity providers. Isn't that right? That really represents you and CoreShell in a very positive light?
Absolutely. You know, I think especially for an early stage development company, where we're not going to have product for a while, and we're not going to have really those big commercial deals, there has to be some indication that the market wants what you're selling. Yeah. And there's no real fundable way to do that except for to get one of these early stage contracts and really show off. You know, it's one thing to send out a bunch of samples. It's another to say that, hey, someone was willing to reach into their pocket and pay us to show off what we're doing. They're that excited that they're going to pay us, regardless of the amount of cash that came in. And that was a huge part of our fundraising.
That's exactly right. And I also will say, before we move on to joint development agreements, is that you really have to be very careful to set clear and concise pass criteria, because what you may find in an NRE situation is that the goalposts will creep around, and you don't want to have that happen, because you will be investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into winning a $25,000 NRE, and that is really inefficient. So at the outset, you want to be very clear about what does it mean to pass and what does it mean to not pass. Is it you know, lower? Well, you can't really do cost in an NRE, but you do some sort of performance attribute around, is it faster, is it thinner, is it fatter, is it whatever it is, and that's the kind of thing that you have to be really clear about when you're designing your NREs.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's go around here to the key insights when you're dealing with the negotiation of an NRE and ultimately closing one, is that if a counterparty is willing to engage in an NRE, you're getting some signals from them. Is first of all, not invented here, which is a real concern when dealing with a big company, because obviously they have an R&D group. They don't want to be shown up by a small startup. They think they're quite clever. There's usually not incentives for them to bring in outside solutions. In some cases, big corporates have embraced outside innovation as well, but you're going to find that out very quickly. You're also going to find out if that business unit has any budget to do this kind of stuff. Both of those indicators are going to be important for you going forward, because you may find out that if they're not willing to do the NRE, then they're probably not interested in doing a joint development agreement that makes sense for you. And they probably are very, very far away from a PO, and they might just be using you to learn. And that's a really bad outcome for you, because you'll spend lots of cycles thinking that the customer's ready to buy when they're really not ready to buy. And they're just trying to learn and maybe even rip you off in some cases. So an NRE is a good soft close testing agent. And I think you've done that very well. So you can also discover, is there an internal process where they're competing against their own discovery, or they're creating a little forum for you to fight amongst other startup options. And you can figure that out pretty quickly too in this process. We've talked about layering them up, which you did very well, and ultimately think about, what is your roadmap? Like, where do you want to end up, Jonathan, with CoreShell at the end of this conversation with potential customer A? And that's always really important when you're designing these types of agreements. And by making your counterparty look successful, ultimately, it will probably lead to good things, because they're taking a risk on you. They're really not getting very much except for test results back. And then they're going to have to go put their neck on the line and champion that with their own group to say, no, I believe in Jonathan. I believe in Roger. I think that we can work with these people, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to have to put their neck on the line. So you making your counterparty highly successful is absolutely in your best interest. So if they're willing to do an NRE, do an NRE. If you can layer them up, do that too. Start with a small one, layer it up, maybe get a 50K, 75K, up to 100K. It's going to be pretty easy to discover all these things. And also, just for the listener, these slides will be available. Obviously, the recording will be available as well, so you can access these slides. Jonathan.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we got some NRE contracts, and we were excited about them. And after we talked about it, it really did seem like NRE agreements were the way to go for our stage of company. We've executed a few with potential customers, like you mentioned. Unfortunately, for some of our bigger customers, right, the guys with the market share and the ones that can really push back, they're a little cagier. And when I suggest that we do an NRE, sometimes they'll push back and they say, hey, we're not going to do an NRE. It's not worth our time. They want to do a joint development agreement instead. They say they want the full pie. So can you walk me through how to think about a joint development agreement as opposed to just a simple NRE?
Yeah, so it's important to note here that this outcome of the incumbent, the leader, the market leader, is not interested in taking concessions. That's a very real and very normal conversation. So I think that that's important to recognize from the CEO's perspective. When you're looking at entering the market, the number one, the number two, or number three in the market is typically not where you're going to find a lot of flexibility or interest in innovation. Where you find usually the appetite for this type of innovation is in, competitor number 3 that wants to go to 1, or 5 that wants to go to, 3, or something like this. This sort of lower than 1, 2, or 3 dynamics is usually where you find some appetite for doing NREs, or ultimately potentially joint development agreements as well. So joint development agreements are really a more robust engagement. This is where the entrepreneur is not only getting something, but they're also giving a fair bit as well. And obviously what you're trying to achieve here as the objective is advancing your technology platform, You are establishing a relationship, which is important. You're testing market fit. You're avoiding bankruptcy. This is typically non-dilutive, but in some cases, joint development agreements can come with some sort of equity warrant. That is, in some cases, typical. Just be aware of that it may not be non-dilutive. We've put it in here because that's what we'd hope you could achieve, but it's not always necessarily the case. So when you're doing a joint development agreement, almost always their legal department, their intellectual property group, and their commercial group, and so in some cases their R&D group, all have to approve this, which means different approvers in each case. You'll have to go through 3 to 4 different approvers. That means time. When you have 3 different agreements, you also have a lot of lawyer time on your side. So you're talking, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to close a JDA correctly with a large counterparty that is going to try to be very clever and try to get as much as they possibly can out of it, including wrapping you up exclusively to them, which you, of course, do not want. They're slow to create. They're expensive to create. There is benefit, of course, because you're getting a potential customer paying you to do something, as you've said before. And because of the deep engagement, they usually improve your performance, because you're all of a sudden going to be intimately working with a world-class manufacturer, world-class customer, and they're going to expect the same kind of performance out of you. So it can raise the game of your executive team. You also want to, in these joint development agreements, just like in an equity financing, you want to avoid a backdoor sale where your counterparty is getting so many rights that preclude you from freedom of movement going forward. So you have to be really, really careful that strategically you're not locking yourself down. Tell me, I know that you were in the process when we first met last year of talking about these joint development agreements. Without, of course, naming names, but did you run into these situations where the counterparty was looking for, global exclusive? And that's usually where they start. Talk us through a little bit of the challenges that you had initially when you were looking at joint development agreements.
Yeah, that was for one of our bigger customers. I would say that they were the number 1 player in the market space, right? They didn't really want to give up too much, and they're used to getting their way. So you're exactly right. When they proposed the joint development agreement initially, their stance, their default stance is to ask for everything, right? So they'll just come out and say, we want exclusive right to technology, we want all the IP developed, we want everything that not only that we develop, but also that what they develop, but also what our startup developed to be owned by them. All that. They
weren't willing to pay for it, right? They weren't willing to give you,
and they weren't willing to pay for it. So all that stuff is kind of their default stance, and I think it's good just to be ready for that and just to say, hey, no, sometimes it's I think for us especially, it's alluring to have this big name come and talk to you as an early stage startup, and you're thinking about the potential and you're thinking about the market validator, of course. But I think we've been fortunate enough to have some other potential customers in hand, and we were able to push back, and basically you just have to be willing to push back and say, hey, this is not worth it. We know you guys are the number 1, we know you guys are big, but this sort of owner's agreement is not worth it. And honestly, they're expecting it as well, right? Because this is kind of their default, but they're if you push back, that really shows actually better for you, because it shows that, hey, these guys are more professional, they are probably more serious, they're not just willing to give up everything just to work with us, and so they will start to take you a little bit more seriously. And when we pushed back, we were actually able to push back and say, hey, the joint development agreement is not the right fit for us. They agreed with as well, especially the person we were working with directly, the head of the business unit, said, we understand, let's move to an NRE. So we were able to push back there, but I'm glad that we didn't try to go down this route of a joint development agreement too early.
Yeah, a little bit more on that is you're 100% right to push back, but characterize that a little bit more by saying push back with respect. It's not like, I can't believe this is not an offensive thing they've tried to do. It's their job. And so simply being respectful, I mean, especially because the energy storage business is so solidly at the moment focused in Asia Pacific, I think that it's very important for entrepreneurs to recognize that face is a very important part of this negotiation. And being respectful and saying, you know, okay, I can understand why you'd like to go that way. It doesn't work for us. So what else can we consider? Can we consider an NRE as you did, going down that route? It was ultimately better for you, but throwing it back in someone's face is very inappropriate, and you want to be careful about treating it with kid gloves, let's say.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Just to tag off that, what we also realized was that it really, what you're trying to do is help them sell you as well, right? Because in the end, the person that you work with directly, they have to become your biggest proponent, or else you're not going to get anywhere. So making sure to develop that relationship, and I think that was one of the things that was a key enabler for us to move forward with the NRE, was that they saw it was best for them as well.
That's great. That's great, and good advice. Thank you, Jonathan. So let's walk into the joint development a little bit further. And the first rule of any joint development conversation is know your customer. Let's go back to that again. You can't go back to that too many times. But then the real first step that you've got to do is, knowing your customer, you have to map them out. What sort of technologies are they currently commercializing? What does their technological roadmap look like? Are you competing with their technological roadmap, or are you augmenting? Are you expanding their catalog into important markets? Who are their current customers? Are they selling direct? Are they indirect? Their field of use, like where are they? Are they really focused on mobility, or do they really think that stationary grid storage is the place to be? Are they only in Wisconsin, or are they in Jakarta? These regional questions are also extremely important. So dissecting and segmenting your customer can be really important to designing the exact right joint development agreement, which gives the startup you a lot of freedom, but also really hits on the pleasure points of your counterparty. All right, so the first rule here around joint development agreements is know your customer, and then segment it down, and then lock in the segments that are important to them and you, which don't have too much restrictions on where you potentially might go. For example, let's just talk about the largest by volume lithium-ion battery manufacturer happens to be Chinese, and let's assume that their key market is to sell into the automotive business, and they have an interest in only supplying Chinese automotive manufacturers. Then that's fantastic. You simply say, okay, let's make an agreement in a joint development style that only allows you to use our technology or consider our technology for this specific type of application, for this specific region, for this specific period of time. And after that, we're going to have to negotiate something different. Maybe that's a purchase order, maybe it's a royalty agreement, something different. But that's a really good example of where you can simply say this fragment, and then that slice of the fragment, and then the slice of the slice is what we're going to do. And anything outside of that is going to be, not considered part of this, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The next step here, and it's something that gets really sticky, is how it all works financially. And this isn't just about the money, because it's also as important about the people. You want to get your royalty considerations after you've segmented your customer, after you've agreed on what the joint development agreement will cover, a royalty agreement that will cover your costs, because ultimately you have to remember the objective is to move your technology development forward without really taking much of a hit on your commercialization process. So getting that royalty, getting the segmentation right. And I think that when you start talking about, well, how much is it going to be, and sales minimums and margins and this and that, I think that that's a place, and certainly Ian agreed, that that's a place where you probably can give something, because if you've segmented correctly, then giving up a little bit of the financial upside is not terribly dramatic. And that you should be able to just say, okay, and the counterparty's gonna have a lot of trouble because the CFO says, well, wait, this is just a joint development agreement. Why are we giving up our market potential to this startup? So that gets really sticky right there. And I think that this is a place where entrepreneurs can give, and not, as long as they've segmented correctly, they can give without much cost. And that's a really good thing to remember when you're negotiating these things. The next is about the people. And I think, Jonathan, you said it before, which is making your champion an ally is really, really important, but also establishing roles and responsibilities on the counterparty side, and also signing your staff up to specific roles and responsibilities and who covers what costs and these kinds of things are all really important when you're doing a joint development agreement, because if you don't know, I mean, you really should be interviewing so that your champion says, oh, well, this particular person is going to be the technical lead on this joint development. Okay, well, can we meet that person before we sign up to this? Because they may be incompetent. They may have some not invented here. There may be something where someone has an invisible thumb on the scale that doesn't allow you to progress and succeed with this joint development agreement. And as with the NRE, joint development should have a very clear end game, and it should have a very clear pass-fail criteria, so that it's not listed here. I'll add it before I circulate the slides, but pass-fail criteria are really, really important, and time elements are really important. It's only for 6 months, it's only for 12 months, and the pass-fail criteria is that it's green, not blue at the end, something like this. Very, very clear and distinctive. So this is how we do it. Talk us through when you were originally looking at doing joint developments, and certainly currently are looking at doing joint developments. Tell me a little bit about that triangulation around personnel and responsibilities.
Yeah, I think that was something that we've definitely had to learn is really mapping out the different stakeholders in the corporate partner that we've been working with, ensuring that we understand who the person is we're directly working with the most, what their responsibility, what their gain is, and that was something that we talked about a lot. Making sure that we understand, hey, they're head of a business development unit. Really, what they're trying to do is they're trying to develop a commercial product, right? And we want to help them in that. If they're head of an R&D unit, really, what is their goal? If they're like you mentioned, the CFO, what's their goal? And ensuring that when we're talking to these different people within the organization, we understand where their aims lie, so that we can kind of navigate this and not get, like you said, boxed into an agreement that eventually is not going to be a winner for us. But also understanding what their goals are, so that we can talk to them about that. So that was a big deal. And then, like you mentioned, obviously on our side, one of the things that prevented us from getting into the joint development agreement was the cost sharing, right? We just calculated it, and it just didn't make sense for our side to be spending that many resources to develop something that we weren't sure if we wanted to enter that type of relationship with it.
Yeah, that's a great firsthand story of how it can or cannot work. So that's the end. And I just want to go back before we conclude here. First of all, I want to thank you, Jonathan, for being so patient as we got this financial fuel conversation together with Ian, and it's unfortunate he couldn't join us this morning. We're going to be sharing this on our open office area for everyone to review. We'll have the PowerPoint, we'll have this video, and I think you're going to share it with your channels as well. Jonathan Tan is the CEO of CoreShell Technologies, and he and his partner Roger have founded this business. They are currently fundraising for private equity investment. They are a winner of a grant from us, amongst others, and they have successfully navigated NREs with potential customers where they got revenue from these counterparties, and they're now in joint development agreements, in some cases paid pilot situations. But we have to remember, going back to the beginning, is that there are many sources of capital to fuel your business, and that it's not just venture or die. Having a delighted direct customer relationship is the ultimate goal for any CEO. And I know it's what you and Roger strive for CoreShell. And it is just an absolute pleasure to be able to work with you in the open office sessions. And I look forward to more together.
Thanks, Jon. No, it's been our pleasure. Obviously, hopefully you can tell we've been thinking about a lot of this stuff because of our discussions during open office hours, and it's really helped us get set up to be in a good position. And like you mentioned, I think that if we hadn't gone through these steps before our fundraise, we would not have been in the right position to fundraise. So it was absolutely critical to think about all these other steps for us. And thank you to you and to Ian for those discussions. It's been really great.
It's our pleasure. We serve you. Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon.